Sometimes the greatest act of kindness comes from the most unexpected source. In the wild boomtown of Copper Creek, 4 women stood at a corral fence, their dreams shattered by cruel laughter and rejection at a bride auction. They were called too plain, too frail, too old by men who saw only surfaces. Then Jackson, Iron Cole, a loner everyone thought was half mad, stepped forward and changed everything. He didn't offer them marriage, he offered them something far more valuable: partnership in a vision no one else could see. What he built on worthless land would make these forgotten women the wealthiest, most powerful people in the territory. But how does a recluse cowboy turn rejection into an empire? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The spring of 1883 brought more than wildflowers to the Montana Territory. It brought desperate hope in the hearts of women who had nothing left to lose. Mary Ashford pressed her gloved hand against the train window, watching the landscape transform from civilized farmland to raw wilderness. At 52 years old, she understood this journey was her final gamble. The cameo locket around her neck held the only photograph of her daughter, Catherine, who had died of scarlet fever 3 years prior. After that, everything had crumbled. Her husband had drunk himself to death within a year, leaving debts Mary's teaching salary could never cover. The bank had taken their Boston home, and the school board had quietly suggested she retire to make room for younger teachers. So here she was, on a bride train heading west to a town she had only seen on a map, Copper Creek. The advertisement had promised opportunity, new beginnings, respectable men seeking educated wives. Mary was not naive enough to believe the promise entirely, but she was desperate enough to try. Across from her sat Ellen Pritchard, a Philadelphia seamstress whose sharp tongue hid a fundamentally kind heart. At 45, Ellen had spent the last 20 years caring for her invalid mother, watching her own life pass by through a window. When her mother finally died last winter, Ellen had found herself alone in a city that had no use for an aging spinster. Her skilled fingers could create beautiful dresses, but the young shop owners wanted young faces behind their counters. The bride train was her last chance to be more than invisible. Ellen caught Mary's eye and offered a wry smile. "Second thoughts?" "Third and fourth," Mary admitted. "You?" "I stopped counting at 20. Ellen's fingers automatically smoothed the fabric of her traveling dress. "A nervous habit. But what choice do we have? Stay and starve with dignity, or try and possibly fail with hope?" In the seat behind them, Rose Chen studied a worn book on medicinal herbs, her dark eyes moving across the pages with practiced focus. At 38, she carried the double burden of being both a woman alone and half Chinese in a country that barely tolerated either. Her father had been a Chinese laborer on the Transcontinental Railroad, her mother an Irish immigrant who had loved him despite the law forbidding their marriage. Both were gone now, lost to influenza 2 years ago. Rose had inherited her mother's pale skin and her father's dark eyes, along with his knowledge of Eastern medicine and her mother's stubborn Irish will. She had worked as an herbalist in San Francisco's Chinatown, but the Chinese Exclusion Act had made life increasingly difficult. White customers stopped coming. Chinese customers could barely afford to pay. When she heard about the bride trains, she knew her mixed heritage would be a problem, but staying meant certain poverty. The fourth woman in their small group was Delia Murphy, a 29-year-old Irish immigrant from New York's teeming tenements. She was the youngest, but childhood illness had left her physically frail, with a persistent cough that worsened in cold weather. Her thin frame and pale complexion made her look even more delicate than she was. But anyone who mistook Delia's physical weakness for weakness of spirit learned quickly that her will was iron strong. Delia had survived things that would have broken stronger people. She had watched 3 siblings die of disease in cramped tenement rooms. She had worked in factories where girls lost fingers to machines. She had buried both parents, before she turned 25. The bride train represented escape from a life that was slowly killing her. Montana's clean air might even help her breathing, she told herself. It had to be better than New York's coal smoke and factory dust. The four women had formed an unlikely alliance during the 3-week journey west. They shared food, took turns watching each other's few belongings, and quietly supported each other when fear threatened to overwhelm hope. They had learned each other's stories in whispered conversations during long nights on hard train benches. Now, as the train finally pulled into Copper Creek's rough-hewn station, they gathered their carpetbags and helped each other straighten their best dresses. First impressions mattered, they all knew. Perhaps everything depended on these next few hours. Copper Creek assaulted their senses the moment they stepped off the train. The town was barely 5 years old, born from a rich copper strike that had drawn thousands of men to these remote mountains. Muddy streets churned with wagon traffic. Hastily constructed buildings leaned at odd angles, many still showing raw lumber that had never seen paint. The air smelled of horse manure, wood smoke, and unwashed men. Saloons outnumbered all other businesses combined, their tinny piano music and raucous laughter spilling into the street even at midday. The few women visible were either hardened prostitutes or grim-faced wives hurrying past with eyes down. This was a man's town, built by men for men, and it showed in every rough corner. Samuel Garrett waited at the station platform, a tall man with slicked-back hair and a smile that never reached his cold eyes. He was the town's banker and the primary organizer of the bride auctions, a profitable side business that brought him a commission on every match. He held a clipboard and checked off names as women descended from the train. "Ladies, ladies, welcome to Copper Creek," he announced in a voice that carried false warmth. "I trust your journey was pleasant. We have accommodations arranged at the hotel where you can refresh yourselves. The auction begins at 3 o'clock sharp in the town square. I suggest you make yourselves presentable. The miners are eager to meet you." Mary felt her stomach tighten at his oily tone. The word auction bothered her more each time she heard it, though the advertisements back east had used gentler terms like introduction, social, and matching event. But standing here now, watching Garrett's calculating eyes assess each woman like livestock, she understood the brutal truth of what they had signed up for. The hotel was barely worthy of the name, a 2-story wooden building with thin walls and questionable cleanliness. But it had beds and washing water, which was more than they'd had on the train. The women shared a room, pooling their limited resources to afford even that, as they helped each other dress for the auction, attempting to look their best with worn clothes and tired faces. Ellen voiced what they were all thinking. "We're the last train of the season. Did you notice? Every woman on this train is either old, plain, or desperate. They're scraping the bottom of the barrel back east." Rose nodded slowly, braiding her dark hair. "The pretty young ones already got picked in previous trains. We're what's left." "Then we'll make the best of it," Mary said firmly, though her hands trembled as she fastened her cameo locket. Inside the locket, Catherine's young face smiled up at her. She touched it once, quickly, then closed it. "We didn't come this far to give up before we start." Delia coughed into her handkerchief, then forced a smile. "At least we'll be together until we're matched. That's something." They walked to the town square together, joining the other women from the train. The square was really just a large clearing in front of the largest saloon, now filled with rough wooden benches and a raised platform. Men already crowded the area, hundreds of them, fresh from the mines, some still covered in copper dust. They had bathed for the occasion, most of them, but the smell of unwashed bodies and whiskey still hung heavy in the air. Mayor Theodore Pike stood on the platform, a portly man in an expensive suit that looked absurdly out of place in the rough surroundings. He was corrupt to his core, everyone knew it, but he was also the man who kept enough order to allow businesses to function. He took his cut from every enterprise in town, including the bride auctions. "Gentlemen," Pike's voice boomed, "welcome to today's bride auction. We have 23 fine ladies from back east, all of good moral character, all seeking honest, hard-working husbands. Bidding starts at $100 per lady, which covers her travel costs and a small administrative fee. Let's proceed in an orderly fashion. The auction began. Samuel Garrett brought women forward one at a time, announcing their names and ages, sometimes mentioning a skill like cooking or sewing. The younger women went first. A pretty blonde of 19 brought bids up to $300 before a mine foreman claimed her. A widow of 30 with nursing experience went for $250. Mary watched the process with growing horror. The men shouted out bids like they were buying horses. They made crude comments about the women's appearances. Some women smiled nervously, trying to look appealing. Others stood stiff with humiliation, but held their ground because they had no choice. As the afternoon wore on, the remaining women grew progressively older or less conventionally attractive. The bidding slowed. Some women went for the minimum $100. Men grumbled about the poor selection. The crowd grew restless and drunk. Finally, only 4 women remained on the platform. Mary, Ellen, Rose, and Delia stood together as they had stood on the train, drawing strength from each other's presence. Samuel Garrett's voice took on an impatient edge. "We have 4 more ladies, gentlemen. Let's finish this up." Mary Ashford, 52 years old, schoolteacher from Boston. Silence. Men shifted uncomfortably. Someone in the back shouted, "Too old." Others laughed. Ellen Pritchard, 45, expert seamstress. "Plain as a post," another voice yelled. More laughter. Rose Chen, 38, herbalist and healer. "Half-breed," the slur cut through the crowd. Rose's face remained impassive, but Mary saw her hands clench. Delia Murphy, 29, general housework. "Looks like a stiff wind would blow her over." Someone made an exaggerated coughing sound, mocking Delia's frail appearance. The laughter grew louder, meaner. Samuel Garrett's face reddened with anger, not at the crowd's cruelty, but at the loss of commission. "Come now, gentlemen. Surely someone. Get them off the stage." Marcus Webb stood up, the largest mine owner in the territory. He was a big man with an even bigger ego. "We paid good money for this auction, and you bring us old maids and damaged goods? This is an insult." The crowd roared approval. Mayor Pike stepped forward, trying to restore order, but the damage was done. The 4 women stood on the platform, exposed and humiliated, while hundreds of men laughed at them. Samuel Garrett's voice turned cold. "Fine. These 4 have travel debts of $100 each. They can pay immediately or face arrest for fraud. Your choice, ladies." Mary's heart sank. They had no money. The journey west had taken everything. They exchanged desperate glances. Around them, the crowd began to disperse, the entertainment over, their interest gone. "Down you come," Garrett snapped. "We'll discuss your debts at my bank. Perhaps we can work something out." His smile suggested the arrangement would be degrading. The 4 women descended from the platform, their faces burning with shame. They walked to the edge of the square and stood together at the old corral fence, trying to maintain dignity while their world collapsed around them. That was when they noticed him. A man standing alone at the very back of the dispersing crowd, watching them with an expression that was neither mocking nor lustful, just watching. He was perhaps 50, weathered by sun and work, dressed in worn but clean work clothes. His face was hard-lined but not cruel. Something in his eyes suggested he saw them as people, not as entertainment or failures. Jackson Iron Cole had not wanted to come to the auction. He hated town politics, hated crowds, hated the whole degrading spectacle of desperate women being sold to lonely men. But he had come anyway, drawn by something he could not quite name. Perhaps it was the memory of his sister Sarah, who had stood on a similar platform years ago in another town. Perhaps it was simple human decency in a place that had forgotten what that meant. He had watched the whole thing unfold with growing anger, and now, as the 4 rejected women stood at the corral fence with nowhere to go and no one to help them, he made a decision that would change all their lives forever. Jackson Cole stepped forward. The crowd had mostly scattered, men heading back to the mines or the saloons, discussing which of their fellow miners had gotten good value and which had been fools. Samuel Garrett stood near the platform, conferring with Mayor Pike about the unsold women. Marcus Webb lingered nearby, smoking a cigar and making occasional crude comments to his foreman about the rejected merchandise. Mary felt Ellen's hand slip into hers. Neither woman spoke. There was nothing to say. They had gambled everything on this chance, and they had lost. Behind them, Rose stood straight-backed and silent, her face a mask of composure, even as shame burned inside her. Delia coughed quietly into her handkerchief, her thin shoulders shaking. Samuel Garrett approached them with a ledger under his arm, and that oil-slick smile plastered across his face. "Ladies, we need to discuss your situation. You each owe $100 for your travel costs, as stated in your contracts. That's $400 total. Now, I'm a reasonable man. I understand you don't have that kind of money. Perhaps we can arrange alternative payment methods. I'll pay their debts." The voice came from behind them, deep and quiet, but carrying authority. The four women turned to see the man who had been watching them. Up close, he was taller than they had thought, with broad shoulders and calloused hands that spoke of hard work. His face was deeply tanned, lined by weather and years. Grey touched his dark hair at the temples. His eyes were a startling blue, calm and steady. Samuel Garrett's smile faltered. "Jackson Cole, what business is this of yours?" "I'm making it my business. $400, you said. I'll pay it." The remaining crowd members, who had overheard, stopped to watch. Mayor Pike stepped closer, his face showing surprise. "Cole, you haven't set foot in town for a social event in 3 years. Why the sudden interest in these women?" "That's my concern." Jackson pulled a leather wallet from his coat and counted out bills with deliberate care. $400, their debts are paid. Give me a receipt." Marcus Webb laughed, a harsh bark of sound. "Well, well, Old Iron wants himself some company after all. Which one are you claiming, Cole? Or are you greedy enough to take all 4? He leered at the women. "Though I can't imagine what you'd want with this sorry lot." Jackson's expression did not change, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "Watch your mouth, Webb. These ladies deserve respect, which is more than I can say for most people in this town." "Respect?" Webb laughed again. "For women nobody wanted? You must be even crazier than everyone says." Samuel Garrett took Jackson's money with obvious reluctance. The commission was better than nothing, but the whole situation was irregular. "I'll need them to sign release forms, and you'll need to sign acceptance papers. These women are now your responsibility, Cole. Their debts are transferred to you." "I understand. Where do I sign?" The paperwork was completed quickly. The four women watched in stunned silence, unsure what was happening or what it meant for them. Was this man claiming them as wives? What did he want from them? Mary studied Jackson's face, trying to read his intentions, but his expression revealed nothing except a kind of quiet determination. When the papers were signed and the money exchanged, Jackson finally turned to address the women directly. "My name is Jackson Cole. I own land about 2 hours outside of town. I'm offering you employment, not marriage. You'll work for me, and in return, you'll have a place to live and a share in the business I'm building. If that doesn't suit you, I'll give you money for train tickets back east. Your choice." Ellen found her voice first. "What kind of business?" "I'll explain on the way. We should leave now, before it gets dark." "Do you have belongings?" "At the hotel," Mary said quietly. "Not much. We'll collect them." "Then we go." The crowd watched with undisguised curiosity as Jackson led the four women down the muddy street toward the hotel. Marcus Webb called after them, "You're wasting your money, Cole. Those women won't last a month out on your worthless land." Jackson did not respond, did not even turn around. He simply kept walking, and the women followed because they had no other choice, and because something in his calm manner suggested he meant what he said. At the hotel, they gathered their few possessions. Jackson waited outside with his wagon, a sturdy vehicle pulled by 2 strong horses. When the women emerged with their carpet bags, he helped each one up into the wagon bed with surprising gentleness, treating them with the courtesy that the town had denied them. As Jackson guided the wagon through Copper Creek streets toward the open country beyond, people stopped to stare and point. Word was already spreading. Iron Cole, the crazy hermit, had bought all 4 of the rejected mail-order brides. The story would be told in saloons that night, accompanied by laughter and speculation about what a loner would do with 4 useless women. Samuel Garrett stood on the bank steps, watching them leave with calculating eyes. There was something here he did not understand, and he did not like mysteries. He would keep an eye on Jackson Cole's activities. Mayor Pike stood beside him, equally thoughtful. "What do you think Cole's planning?" "I don't know, but that man doesn't do anything without a reason. He's worked in these mountains for 15 years, keeps to himself, but he's not stupid. There's something we're missing. Should we be concerned? Possibly, but for now, let him waste his money. If his scheme fails, whatever it is, that land of his will be up for grabs. It's worthless now, but you never know what might turn up in these mountains." Back in the wagon, the 4 women sat in silence as Copper Creek disappeared behind them. The road grew rougher, climbing into foothills dotted with pine trees and rocky outcroppings. The sun was lowering toward the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Finally, Delia spoke up, her voice thin but curious. "Mr. Cole, what kind of business are you planning? We have a right to know before we get there." Jackson kept his eyes on the road, but he nodded. "Fair question. I own 40 acres about 8 miles from town. Most people think it's worthless because of the smell. There are natural hot springs on the property. Sulfur smell drives people away. But I see opportunity where they see waste." "Hot springs?" Rose leaned forward, suddenly interested. "Natural thermal springs?" "Yes. 5 separate springs, all with different temperatures. The water comes up hot from deep underground. It's been tested, it's clean, just mineral-rich. The sulfur smell is strong near the springs, but it dissipates quickly." Mary exchanged glances with Ellen. "And your business plan involves these springs somehow?" "Not somehow. Entirely." Jackson finally turned to look at them, and for the first time they saw genuine enthusiasm in his face. "Copper Creek has 3,000 miners, and not a single proper bathhouse. These men work underground in dirt and dust and copper dust that stains everything it touches. They're desperate for cleanliness. Right now, they heat water 1 bucket at a time on wood stoves, if they bathe at all. Most don't. They also have no place to wash their clothes properly. Wives wash for their husbands, but most of these men are single." Ellen's sharp mind began to see the shape of it. "You want to build a bathhouse and a laundry. Not just a bathhouse, the finest bathing facility in the territory. Multiple rooms, privacy, unlimited hot water, piped directly from the springs. And yes, a full commercial laundry service. We'll wash clothes for the entire town if needed. Every miner will be our customer, because we'll be the only option within 50 miles. Rose spoke up, her voice thoughtful. "Thermal spring water has healing properties. We could offer therapeutic baths for ailments, muscle pain, skin conditions. Miners suffer from both." Jackson looked at her with respect. "Exactly. I didn't know we'd have someone with medical knowledge, but that's even better than I hoped." "And you want us to run this operation?" Mary asked slowly, beginning to understand. "But Mr. Cole, we have no experience with such business." "I'm a teacher." Ellen sews. "Rose is an herbalist. Delia," she paused, uncertain. "Delia survived New York tenements, which means she's tougher than half the men in Copper Creek," Jackson said firmly. "I don't need you to have experience. I need you to be willing to work hard and learn. I'll build it. You'll operate it, and we'll share the profits equally, 5 ways split." The women stared at him in shock. "Equal shares?" Ellen said faintly. "You can't mean—" "Equal shares. I provide the land and the construction. You provide the labor to run it. We're partners, not employer and employees. That's the deal." If you don't want it, I'll take you back to town tomorrow and buy you train tickets east. But if you're willing to try, we start building in the morning." The wagon crested a hill, and before them lay a shallow valley surrounded by pine-covered slopes. In the center, steam rose from several points on the ground, catching the late sunlight. Even from this distance, they could smell the sulfur. Jackson's cabin was visible, a small, rough structure that clearly housed only one person. "This is it," Jackson said quietly. "I know it doesn't look like much now, but I can see what it will be. The question is, can you?" The four women looked at the land, at the rising steam, at the impossible hope being offered to them. They looked at each other, these strangers who had become companions through shared humiliation, and without speaking, they each nodded. Mary turned back to Jackson. "We'll try, but Mr. Cole, why are you really doing this? Men don't give women equal shares in anything. What do you really want from us?" Jackson was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, but filled with old pain. "My sister died because men like the ones in that town saw her as something to be used and discarded. I couldn't save her. But maybe I can give you what she never had a real chance. That's all I want. A chance to do something right." In the wagon bed, Mary felt her cameo locket press against her chest, warm from her body heat. Inside, Catherine's photograph waited. Perhaps, she thought, this was why they had come west after all. Not to find husbands, but to find something better. A purpose. The first night was awkward. Jackson's cabin had one room with a single bed, a wood stove, a table, and little else. He insisted the women take the cabin while he slept in the small barn he had built for his horses. No amount of protest would change his mind. "I've slept in worse places," he said simply, gathering a bedroll and leaving them to settle in. "There's beans and bread in the cupboard. Coffee too. I'll wake you at dawn." The women stood in the cramped cabin, looking at each other in the dim lamplight. Ellen finally laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. "Well, this is certainly not what I imagined when I left Philadelphia." "None of this is what we imagined," Mary said, sitting heavily on the single chair. "But it's what we have. We should try to make the best of it." Rose examined the cabin with a practical eye. "We'll need more living space before winter. This won't house 5 people. "Assuming we're still here by winter," Delia said quietly, then coughed into her handkerchief. The evening air was cold, and the thin walls did little to keep it out. They shared the bed that night, all 4 of them packed together like sardines, too tired and overwhelmed to care about propriety. In the darkness, Mary heard Delia's labored breathing and Ellen's quiet sniffles. Rose was silent, but Mary sensed she was not sleeping either. "Are we fools," Ellen whispered, "trusting a strange man, staying on worthless land in the middle of nowhere?" "Probably," Mary admitted, "but we were fools the moment we got on that train east. At least this fool's choice gives us some control over our fate." Dawn came too early. Jackson knocked on the door before the sun had fully risen, his voice brisk and businesslike. "Time to work. Dress warm. I've made coffee." The women stumbled outside to find Jackson had indeed made coffee strong enough to strip paint and had laid out biscuits and jerky. He had also brought out his survey map and several rolled-up architectural drawings that looked surprisingly professional. "I drew up plans 3 years ago," Jackson explained, spreading the papers on a makeshift table he had constructed from boards and sawhorses. "I've been saving money and gathering materials slowly. Most of the timber is already cut and seasoned, stacked behind the barn. The stone for foundations is quarried and ready. I have most of the hardware, pipes, fixtures, nails, tools. What I need now is help building it." The drawings showed a large rectangular structure with multiple rooms, a complex plumbing system, and detailed specifications for everything from roof pitch to door dimensions. Mary studied them with growing respect. "You drew these yourself?" "Taught myself from books. I worked construction when I first came west, learned the basics. The rest I figured out through trial and error." Ellen traced the pipe layouts with one finger. "This is remarkably sophisticated. The hot water routes through here, she pointed, into individual bathing rooms. Separate facilities for men and women. And here, the laundry section with drainage systems. You understand the drawings? Jackson looked surprised. I've been measuring and planning fabric patterns for 30 years, Mr. Cole. Spatial reasoning is the same, whether you're designing a dress or a building. The principles apply. Then you're hired as my project manager. We'll work from your assessments. Ellen blinked. I'm what? You understand the plans. You'll help oversee construction and make sure we're following them correctly. Rose, I saw you looking at the springs last night. What did you think? Rose had indeed examined the hot springs as the sun set, kneeling beside the pools to test temperature and smell the water. The hottest spring is approximately 140 degrees. The coolest is around 95. The mineral content is high sulfur, magnesium, calcium. The water is naturally filtered through rock layers. With proper pipe systems, this water could serve both bathing and therapeutic purposes. Jackson nodded. The pipes are copper, which won't corrode in the mineral water. We'll need to plan which springs feed which rooms based on desired temperatures. I can do that, Rose said. I'll need to test each spring more thoroughly, but I can create a mapping system. Mary, you were a teacher. Can you read and write better than most? I taught literature and composition for 25 years, Mary said. Yes, I can write. Then you'll handle our business planning. We need to document everything: costs, timelines, eventual pricing for services. Keep records. When we open, you'll manage the finances and customer accounts. Mary felt a flutter of purpose she had not felt in years. I can do that. Jackson turned to Delia, who stood wrapped in a shawl, trying not to cough. Delia, I won't lie to you. The physical work will be hard. But we'll need someone to manage supplies, prepare meals for the crew that's us, and handle the smaller detail work. Can you do that? Delia straightened her thin shoulders. I've worked in factories where I stood 14 hours a day breathing cotton dust. I can handle this. Then we have a team. Jackson looked at each of them in turn. I need to be clear about something. This will not be easy. We're starting from bare ground. The work will be physically demanding. The town will mock us. They'll say we're crazy, that we'll fail. Some people might actively try to stop us. If you want to leave, now is the time to say so. Once we start, I need everyone committed. The four women looked at each other, having one of those silent conversations that people have when they have been through something terrible together and survived. Then Ellen spoke for all of them. We're committed. We have nowhere else to go, nothing else to lose, and no other options. We might as well build something while we're here. Even if we fail, at least we'll have tried. Then we start today. Jackson rolled up the drawings. First project is expanding living quarters. Can't build a bathhouse if we're all sleeping in a pile like puppies. We'll add onto the cabin 2 rooms, one for the ladies, one for me. Simple construction, should take a week if we work hard. He handed out tools, hammers, saws, measuring tapes, and began teaching them the basics of carpentry. He was patient but firm, showing them how to measure twice and cut once, how to drive a nail straight, how to check if a board was level. The women had never done such work, but they learned quickly because they had to. Ellen discovered that her seamstress precision translated well to measuring and marking lumber. Rose's herbalist knowledge of plant properties helped her understand wood grain and how different woods behaved. Mary's teaching skills made her excellent at following instructions and solving problems methodically. Delia's determination overcame her physical weakness. She could not lift heavy timbers, but she could organize materials and handle detailed finishing work. By the end of the first day, they had framed out the new walls for the addition. They were exhausted, covered in sawdust, sporting minor cuts and bruises. But they had also accomplished something real and visible. They had built something with their own hands. That night, sitting around a campfire because the cabin was too small for them all to eat inside, Jackson spoke more openly than he had before. You all did well today. Better than I expected, honestly. I thought I would have to teach every little thing, but you learned fast and worked hard. If we keep this pace, we'll have the living quarters done ahead of schedule." "Then what?" Mary asked, wrapping her hands around a cup of coffee. "Then we start on the bathhouse proper. That's the big project, probably 3 months of solid work, but it'll be worth it. This place will be the finest facility in the territory." Ellen looked at the land around them, at the steaming springs visible in the starlight. "Do you really think people will come all the way out here? 8 miles is a long way for a bath." Jackson smiled slightly. "They'll come. Men who work underground in copper dust that never fully washes off, men who sleep in bunkhouses that smell like sweat and tobacco. They'll come, and they'll pay well for the privilege. We'll offer what no one else can: comfort, cleanliness, privacy, and healing. In a place like Copper Creek, that's worth more than gold." Rose stirred the fire with a stick. "There's something you're not telling us. What happens if we succeed? What happens when the town realizes this land isn't worthless, that your vision was right all along?" Jackson was quiet for a moment. "Then we'll have problems. Men like Samuel Garrett and Marcus Webb don't like being proven wrong. They especially don't like seeing women succeed. We'll face that when we come to it. For now, we focus on building." That night, sleeping in the still unfinished addition on blankets spread over fresh sawdust, Mary touched her cameo locket and thought about the future for the first time in years without feeling despair. They had a long way to go. Success was far from certain, but they had taken the first step, and that was more than she'd had yesterday. In the darkness, she heard Ellen whisper, "Are we really going to do this?" "Yes," Mary whispered back. "We really are." 6 weeks into the project, the expanded living quarters stood complete, and the foundation for the main bathhouse had been laid. The women had developed calluses on their hands and a rhythm to their work. They rose with the sun, worked until noon, took a brief meal, then worked until darkness made construction impossible. Every night they fell into exhausted sleep, too tired even to dream. But something unexpected had happened during those weeks. They had become a team, then something more, a family of sorts. They learned each other's strengths and weaknesses, developed inside jokes, created small traditions. Ellen's sharp tongue became affectionate teasing rather than defensive sarcasm. Rose smiled more often, her natural reserve softening. Delia's cough improved in the clean mountain air, and colour came back to her pale cheeks. Mary found herself humming while she worked, something she had not done since Catherine died. Jackson remained somewhat apart, respectful of their space and privacy, but he was always there when they needed him. He taught them skills with patient thoroughness. He listened when they talked. He never once made them feel inferior or incapable, even when they made mistakes. His presence was steady as bedrock, and they began to trust him in ways that surprised them all. The trips to town for supplies became regular necessities, and they were never pleasant. Copper Creek had not forgotten the rejected mail-order brides, and the news that Jackson Cole had put them to work on his worthless land was a source of endless amusement. On a Tuesday morning in late May, Ellen and Mary made a supply run for lumber and hardware. They took Jackson's wagon, though Jackson had offered to come with them. Ellen had refused. "We can't hide behind you forever," she had said firmly. "We need to establish that we have business in this town, and we won't be intimidated." The lumber yard was run by a decent man named Thomas Reed, one of the few townspeople who treated them with basic courtesy. He helped load their order without comment or mockery. But as they drove the loaded wagon down Main Street, they passed the bank, and Samuel Garrett stood on the steps, watching them. "Well, well, if it isn't Cole's charity cases. Still playing at construction, ladies." His voice dripped with false friendliness. "How long until you give up this foolish scheme and come back to town looking for real work? I'm sure we could find positions for you." The way he said it made clear what kind of positions he meant. Ellen pulled the wagon to a stop. Mary put a hand on her arm in warning, but Ellen ignored it. "Mr. Garrett, we're not charity cases, and we're not playing. We're building a legitimate business on legitimate land. I suggest you concern yourself with your own affairs." Garrett's smile turned cold. That worthless sulfur pit isn't fit for anything but snake dens. You're wasting Cole's money and your time. But I suppose desperate women will believe any fool's promise. The only fools here are the ones who can't see opportunity when it bubbles right out of the ground. Ellen shot back. Good day, Mr. Garrett. She snapped the reins, and the wagon moved on. But Mary had seen the calculation in Garrett's eyes, and it troubled her. That was not the face of a man who found them amusing. That was the face of a man who saw something he did not like. When they returned to the property, they found Marcus Webb's foreman standing near the springs, examining the construction site. Jackson stood a few yards away, arms crossed, his face expressionless, but his stance protective. "Can I help you?" Jackson asked as the women climbed down from the wagon. The foreman, a thick-necked man named Bill Carson, spat tobacco juice onto the ground. "Mr. Webb sent me to have a look at what you're building. He has concerns about water rights. The springs are on my property. I have the deed filed proper with the territory. My water rights are documented. Still, Mr. Webb thinks there should be an inspection. Make sure you're not somehow diverting water that might flow downstream to other properties. The springs are self-contained. They don't flow anywhere except where I direct them. Now get off my land before I remove you." Carson smiled unpleasantly. Big talk from one man. "You think these women will back you up in a fight?" He looked at Mary and Ellen with open contempt. "Old ladies and half-breeds don't make much of a crew, Cole." Rose had been working near the foundation and heard the exchange. She walked over calmly, carrying the large post-hole digger she had been using. "You should leave now," she said quietly, "before someone gets hurt." Carson laughed. "You threatening me, girl?" "No, informing you. Leave." Something in Rose's absolute calm seemed to unnerve Carson more than threats would have. He backed toward his horse. "You're making enemies, Cole. Mr. Webb don't forget disrespect. Neither does the mayor. You keep pushing, you'll regret it." "I'm not pushing. I'm building on my own land, which is my right. What Webb and Pike think about it is their problem, not mine." Carson rode off, but the encounter left a sour taste. That night, over dinner, the group discussed what had happened. "They're going to cause trouble," Ellen said flatly. "That foreman wasn't here to inspect anything. He was here to intimidate us." "Why?" Delia asked. "We're not competing with anyone. We're not taking anything from them." "We're not taking anything yet," Mary said slowly. "But if Jackson's right, and this business succeeds, we'll be taking something very valuable money. Every dollar a miner spends at our bathhouse is a dollar not spent at Webb's company store or in Pike's saloons. We're going to affect their bottom line." Jackson nodded. "That's part of it. But there's more. This is a town run by men who see women as property or problems. If you four succeed, if you become independent and wealthy, that threatens their entire worldview. They don't want examples of women who don't need men to survive." "So what do we do?" Rose asked. "We keep building. We document everything, property deeds, water rights, business plans. We make sure everything is legal and proper so they can't use the law against us, and we watch our backs." Over the following weeks, they worked even harder, driven partly by determination and partly by a new urgency. The bathhouse frame rose steadily. The plumbing system began to take shape, with copper pipes running from the springs to various parts of the building. They dug drainage systems, laid stone floors, framed out individual bathing rooms. Jackson's design was brilliant in its efficiency. The hottest springs fed the bathing rooms, where water temperature could be adjusted by mixing with cooler water from the lower temperature springs. The laundry facility used the mid-range temperature water, perfect for washing clothes. Drainage flowed into a separate system that would prevent contamination. The whole operation was designed to be sustainable and efficient. Ellen's measuring tape, the same one she had used for 30 years of seamstress work, now measured lumber and pipe lengths. She had become the de facto quality control inspector, catching errors before they became problems. Mary kept meticulous records in a leather-bound ledger she had purchased in town. Every expense, every hour worked, every plan and decision. Rose mapped the springs with scientific precision, creating a system for managing water temperature and flow. Delia organized materials, prepared meals, and handled the countless small tasks that kept the project moving. They celebrated small victories. The day the first section of roof went on, they opened a bottle of whiskey Jackson had been saving and toasted their progress. The day the first copper pipe was successfully connected to a spring and hot water flowed exactly where it was supposed to, Rose actually laughed out loud with delight. But money was becoming a serious concern. Jackson's savings were depleting faster than planned. Materials cost more than estimated. Unexpected problems required expensive solutions. One night, Jackson sat with his account books, and the women could see the worry on his face. "We're going to run short," he admitted. "I have enough to finish the basic structure, but not enough for furnishings, fixtures, and supplies. We need about $500 more to do this right." The women looked at each other, having one of their silent conversations. Then Mary stood and went to her room. She returned holding her cameo locket, the one containing Catherine's photograph. Her hands trembled as she placed it on the table. "This is worth about $100. Sell it." "Mary, no," Jackson said immediately. "I can't take that. It's all you have of your daughter. My daughter is in my heart, not in a piece of jewelry. This business is our future. Take it." Ellen disappeared into her room and came back with a small wooden box. Inside was her mother's silverware, tarnished but valuable. $75 maybe. It's yours." Rose slowly removed the jade pendant from around her neck, the one her mother had worn every day of her life. "Jade from China, brought over by my father. It's worth at least $150 to the right buyer." Delia had nothing material of value, but she stood and rolled up her sleeve, showing a small scar on her forearm. "I can work extra hours. I'll take on any task, no matter how hard. That's what I contribute." Jackson looked at each of them, his throat tight with emotion he could not voice. These women who had been rejected and humiliated, who had nothing left to lose, were now sacrificing the last precious things they owned for a shared dream. "I'll pay you back," he said hoarsely, "every penny, with interest." "We're partners," Mary said firmly. "Partners invest in the business. That's what we're doing. Now take these things to town and sell them. We have a bathhouse to finish." The next day, Jackson made the trip to Copper Creek alone, carrying the women's treasures. He sold them to a traveling merchant for a total of $340, more than he had hoped. When he returned, he gave each woman a receipt showing their individual investments. "These receipts are legal documents," he told them. "They prove your ownership stake. Keep them safe." That night, Mary lay in her bed and felt the absence of her locket like a physical ache. But she also felt something else, something that had been missing for years. She felt hope, and she felt proud. They were building something real, something that would last. Catherine would have approved. In the next room, she could hear Ellen crying softly, probably mourning her mother's silverware. But in the morning, Ellen would wipe her eyes, pick up her measuring tape, and go back to work. Because that is what they did now. They worked. They built. They became something more than rejected women with nowhere else to go. They became builders of their own fate. 3 months into construction, the Four Springs bathhouse and laundry began to look like something real. The main building stood 2 stories tall, with a stone foundation and timber frame that would withstand Montana winters. The roof was shingled and weatherproof. Glass windows, expensive but necessary, reflected the mountain sunlight. Inside, individual bathing rooms were taking shape, each one designed for privacy and comfort. Word had spread throughout Copper Creek and the surrounding mining camps. Curious miners began stopping by on Sundays, their one day off, to see what the crazy hermit and his rejected mail-order brides were actually building. Some came to mock, but left impressed despite themselves. Others came with genuine interest, asking questions about services and prices. Jackson handled these visitors with quiet dignity, showing them the plans, explaining the pricing structure they had developed. Baths would cost 50 cents, a fair price for unlimited hot water and privacy. Laundry service would run 25 cents per load, with pickup and delivery available. For those with chronic pain or ailments, Rose would offer therapeutic baths with medicinal herbs for $1. A few miners placed advance orders, paying deposits to reserve opening day appointments. Mary recorded each transaction carefully in her ledger. By late July, they had 53 advance bookings and $240 in deposits. It was not much, but it proved the concept. There was demand, but not everyone was pleased by their progress. Samuel Garrett watched the bathhouse rise with increasing irritation. He had made loans to many businesses in Copper Creek, securing his financial control over the town. The Four Springs was being built without his money, which meant without his influence. That bothered him more than he cared to admit. Mayor Pike shared Garrett's concerns. The town council, which he controlled, began discussing new regulations. Property taxes were mysteriously reassessed. Water rights came under scrutiny. Building code requirements that had never existed before were suddenly being enforced. Pike made no secret of who these new rules were targeting. Marcus Webb took a different approach. He began spreading rumors among his mine workers that the Four Springs would be too expensive, that the women running it could not be trusted, that the sulfur water was probably poisonous. He hinted that men who patronized the bathhouse might find themselves working fewer hours at the mine. The threat was subtle but clear. One afternoon in early August, a delegation from the town council arrived unannounced. Mayor Pike, Samuel Garrett, and 3 council members rode out to inspect the property. Jackson met them at the property line, his face impassive. "Cole, we're here in official capacity," Pike announced, dismounting from his horse with some difficulty. "The council has concerns about your operation. We need to inspect the premises." "By what authority?" Jackson asked calmly. "By the authority of the town council. We have jurisdiction over all commercial operations within 10 miles of Copper Creek. Your jurisdiction ends at the town limits. My property is 8 miles outside those limits. You have no authority here." Garrett stepped forward, his voice smooth and reasonable. "Now, Jackson, don't be difficult. We're just trying to ensure public safety. Thermal springs can be dangerous. The council needs to verify that your facility meets basic safety standards. I'll be happy to arrange an inspection when we open for business. Until then, this is private property, and you're trespassing." One of the council members, a man named Fletcher who owned a hardware store, spoke up. "We've also received complaints about noise and disruption. Your construction activities are disturbing the peace." Ellen had been working nearby and heard this. She walked over, wiping her hands on her work apron. "Disturbing the peace? We're 8 miles from town. Who exactly are we disturbing? The rabbits?" Fletcher's face reddened. "Don't take that tone with me, woman. The council has the right to stay on public land and leave private property owners alone," Ellen interrupted. "Unless you have a warrant or legitimate legal authority, you're trespassing. Mr. Cole asked you to leave. I suggest you do so." Mayor Pike's eyes narrowed. "You're making enemies, Cole, and your women have sharp tongues that are going to get them in trouble." "My partners," Jackson corrected quietly, "speak for themselves, and they're right. Leave my property." The delegation left, but not before Pike made a parting threat. "We'll be watching this operation very closely, Cole. Very closely. One violation, one complaint, one misstep, and we'll shut you down so fast your head will spin." After they left, Mary approached Jackson, worried. "Can they actually shut us down?" "They can try. That's why we've done everything by the book. Our paperwork is perfect, our construction follows every legitimate code, and our water rights are legally sound. They can harass us, but they can't stop us legally. The problem is, men like Pike don't always operate within the law." That night, they discovered what Pike meant by watching closely. The property line fences they had erected were knocked down, supplies left outside disappeared. Someone dumped refuse near the springs, contaminating one of the smaller pools. The message was clear: cooperate or face sabotage. Jackson reported the vandalism to the territorial marshal, a fair man named William Cooper, who had no love for Pike's corrupt administration. Cooper investigated but could find no evidence of who was responsible. "I believe you, Cole," he said privately, "but without witnesses or proof, my hands are tied. Be careful, watch your back." They began taking shifts at night, keeping watch over the property. Rose proved to have keen night vision and hearing, possibly from years of gathering herbs in darkness. She would sit quietly near the main building, alert to any sounds or movements. Twice she spotted men approaching the property and fired warning shots into the air. Both times the intruders fled. Despite the harassment, work continued. The interior of the bathhouse came together beautifully. Each bathing room had a copper tub, hooks for clothing, a small bench, and a privacy screen. The floors were smooth stone that would not retain moisture. Ventilation had been carefully planned to prevent steam build-up. The laundry facility had large copper washing tubs, scrub boards, wringers, and extensive drying racks. The whole operation was designed for efficiency and comfort. Rose created her therapeutic bath protocols, combining her knowledge of herbs with the natural mineral properties of the spring water. She prepared medicinal sachets that could be added to bath water for various ailments: lavender and chamomile for relaxation, eucalyptus for respiratory problems, arnica for muscle pain. She tested each combination carefully, keeping detailed notes in a journal. Mary developed the business systems: scheduling, pricing, customer records, supply ordering. Her teaching background served her well. She created clear procedures for every aspect of the operation, training Delia to handle customer interactions. Despite her initial frailty, Delia had grown stronger with the outdoor work and good food. Her natural kindness and genuine smile would make her perfect for dealing with customers. Ellen supervised the finishing work with an expert eye, ensuring every detail was perfect. She sewed curtains for the bathing rooms, created linens for the laundry business, and even designed simple uniforms for the staff. Her seamstress skills translated into an aesthetic sense that elevated the bathhouse from functional to elegant. In mid-August, they received an unexpected visitor. Thomas Reed, the lumber yard owner, who had always treated them decently, rode out to the property on a Sunday afternoon. He looked uncomfortable but determined. "Mr. Cole, ladies, I wanted to speak with you privately," he began. "I think you should know what's being said in town. Mayor Pike and Samuel Garrett are planning something. I don't know exactly what, but I've heard talk about tax liens and property seizures. They're looking for any excuse to take your land." Jackson's jaw tightened. "Let them try. We've done everything legal and proper." "I know, but sometimes legal doesn't matter when men have power and want something. I just thought you should be warned." Reed paused, then added, "For what it's worth, not everyone in Copper Creek is against you. Some of us are rooting for you to succeed. This town needs more honest business and fewer corrupt politicians." After Reed left, the group sat together in the evening light, contemplating their situation. They were so close to completion: another month, maybe 6 weeks, and they would be ready to open. But the obstacles kept mounting. "Maybe we should try to negotiate with them," Delia suggested hesitantly. "Offer them something to leave us alone." "No," Jackson's voice was firm. "You start negotiating with men like Pike and Garrett, you never stop paying. They'll bleed us dry. We stand our ground." "Then they'll keep coming after us," Ellen said. "Probably. But we knew this wouldn't be easy. Nothing worth having ever is." Jackson looked at each of them. "If anyone wants out, now's the time to say so. I'll understand. This is becoming dangerous, and I won't hold it against anyone who decides to leave." The 4 women looked at each other, and Mary spoke for all of them. "We're not going anywhere. We've invested too much. Not just money and labor, but hope. This is our future. We're not letting corrupt men take it away." Rose nodded. "Besides, we have nowhere else to go. We might as well fight for something that's ours. Then we finish this." Jackson said. "And we do it right. We open the finest bathhouse and laundry in the territory. We succeed so thoroughly that Pike and Garrett can't touch us without looking like the villains they are." They raised their coffee cups in a toast, a ritual they had developed during the long months of construction. "To 4 Springs," Mary said. "To 4 Springs," they echoed, and they went back to work. September brought cooler nights and a sense of urgency. Winter in Montana could arrive suddenly, and they needed to open before the first serious snowfall. The bathhouse was nearly complete, lacking only finishing touches and a final inspection. The sign had been painted and mounted, 4 Springs Bathhouse and Laundry, with all 5 names listed below as proprietors. During these final weeks, the relationships within the group deepened in ways none of them had anticipated. Late one evening, while the others slept, Mary found Jackson sitting outside, staring at the stars. She joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the autumn chill. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "Too much on my mind. Tomorrow we start filling the bathing tubs for the first real test. If the plumbing system fails now, after everything," he shook his head, "it won't fail. You designed it perfectly. Ellen checked every connection 3 times. Jackson was quiet for a moment. "I keep thinking about Sarah, my sister. She would have been 42 this year. She had dreams too, wanted to start a boarding house, provide clean rooms and good meals to travelers. She had it all planned out. Then she came west and ended up at one of those bride auctions, and a man bought her who saw her as property, not a person. She lasted 4 months before his voice caught." Mary put her hand on his arm. "You're giving us what she never had. You know that, don't you? A real chance, dignity, ownership of our own lives. Sarah would be proud of what you're doing." "I hope so. Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing this for the right reasons, or if I'm just trying to fix something that can't be fixed. Both, probably. But that doesn't make it wrong. We're all here for complicated reasons. I'm here because I lost my daughter and couldn't face the life I had without her. Ellen's here because she spent her whole life caring for others and never got to care for herself. Rose is here because this country breaks people who don't fit into neat categories. Delia's here because poverty was killing her slowly. We're all broken in some way, Jackson. But together, we're building something whole." Jackson looked at her with deep respect. "When did you get so wise?" "About 3 months ago, when a stubborn cowboy decided 4 rejected women were worth saving." Mary stood to return inside, then paused. "The next day, they conducted the first full test of the plumbing system. Jackson opened the main valve, and hot spring water began flowing through the copper pipes into the bathhouse. They watched nervously as the water filled the first tub, then the second, checking for leaks or pressure problems. Ellen ran from room to room with a checklist, examining every joint and connection. "No leaks in room 1. Room 2 looking good. Room 3, hold on. Slight drip at the junction, Jackson. Can you tighten this?" Her voice echoed through the building. Jackson made the adjustment with a pipe wrench. "Try now." "Perfect. All rooms operational." In the laundry facility, Rose tested the water temperature and pressure in the washing tubs. "Ideal temperature, strong flow. This will work beautifully." They spent the afternoon testing every aspect of the system, making minor adjustments, verifying that drainage worked properly. By evening, they were satisfied. The 4 Springs bathhouse and laundry was functionally complete. Delia, who had been preparing a celebratory dinner, called everyone to the small dining area they had added to the main cabin. She had made a roast chicken with vegetables, a luxury they rarely afforded. "We should mark this moment properly," she said, her thin face glowing with pride. "We've actually done it, built something remarkable." Over dinner, they discussed the opening date. They settled on October 1st, a Saturday, which would give them 2 weeks for final preparations and promotion. Jackson would print flyers to distribute in Copper Creek and nearby mining camps. Mary would finalize the pricing and scheduling systems. Rose would prepare her medicinal herb sachets. Ellen would complete the linens and uniforms. Delia would stock supplies and set up the customer reception area. The following Monday, Jackson rode into Copper Creek to order printed flyers and purchase final supplies. He stopped at the territorial marshal's office to officially register the business and obtain the necessary permits. Everything was done according to law, giving Pike and Garrett no legal grounds for interference. But when Jackson emerged from the marshal's office, he found Samuel Garrett waiting on the street. Flanked by two rough-looking men Jackson recognized as enforcers who worked for Marcus Webb. "Cole, we need to talk," Garrett said, his voice deceptively pleasant. "Somewhere private. Anything you have to say can be said right here." Garrett's smile thinned. "Very well. I'm here to make you an offer. $5,000 for your property, the bathhouse, and all equipment. That's generous, considering you've invested maybe $3,000. You walk away with a profit, and everyone's happy. Not for sale. You're making a mistake. That land's not worth fighting over. Take the money. Move on. Let your women find proper situations. My partners and I are not interested. The business opens October 1st. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." One of the enforcers stepped into Jackson's path. "Mr. Garrett's trying to be reasonable. You should listen." Jackson met the man's eyes without flinching. "Move." The enforcer hesitated, seeing something in Jackson's expression that made him reconsider. He stepped aside. Jackson walked past them to his wagon, loaded his supplies, and headed back to the property. But the encounter confirmed what they all suspected. Pike, Garrett, and Webb were not going to let them succeed without a fight. When Jackson reported the confrontation, the women's reactions varied. Ellen was furious. "They have no right to threaten us. We should go to Marshal Cooper." "And say what?" Rose asked quietly. "Garrett made an offer. That's not illegal." The implied threat was subtle enough that Cooper couldn't act on it. "Then what do we do?" Delia asked, fear evident in her voice. "We prepare," Jackson said. "From now until opening day, someone stays on the property at all times. We lock up supplies and tools, we document everything, and we stay together. No one goes to town alone." The final 2 weeks before opening were tense. They worked longer hours, driven by both excitement and anxiety. The bathhouse sparkled, every surface cleaned and polished. Rose arranged her medicinal herbs in labeled glass jars, creating an impressive display of therapeutic options. Ellen hung curtains that filtered light beautifully through the bathing rooms. Mary organized the reception area with professional precision. Delia prepared welcome baskets for opening day customers, small soap samples, and Rose's herbal sachets. They created a system for operations. Customers would be greeted by Delia, who would check them in using Mary's scheduling book. Rose would consult on therapeutic bath options if requested. Ellen would oversee the laundry operation. Jackson would handle heavy maintenance and security. They practiced the procedures until everyone could perform their roles smoothly. 5 days before opening, flyers appeared throughout Copper Creek and the mining camps. The printed announcements were simple but effective, describing services, listing prices, and guaranteeing cleanliness, privacy, and professionalism. Advance bookings increased dramatically. Mary's ledger showed 93 confirmed appointments for the first week alone. 3 days before opening, vandals struck again. This time they poisoned one of the smaller springs with lye, making the water unusable. They also destroyed a section of fence and scattered broken glass near the entrance path. Jackson and Rose spent an entire day cleaning up, while Ellen and Mary filed a report with Marshal Cooper. Cooper came out personally to investigate. He was a weathered man in his 50s, honorable in a town that had little use for honor. "This is getting serious, Cole. They're escalating. I can't protect you all the time, and I think you know who's behind this, even if I can't prove it." "We know," Jackson said, "but we're not backing down. I didn't figure you would, but watch yourselves. Men who resort to vandalism don't usually stop there." The night before opening, the 5 partners sat together outside, looking at the bathhouse that had consumed 6 months of their lives. The building was beautiful in the moonlight, solid and real, proof that they could build something lasting. Tomorrow everything changes, Mary said softly. For better or worse, we find out if this dream can survive reality. It will survive, Ellen said with conviction. We've put too much of ourselves into this for it to fail. Rose nodded agreement. The miners need what we're offering. The business is sound. We just need to get through whatever Pike and Garrett throw at us. Delia coughed lightly, then smiled. I can't believe we actually did this. 6 months ago we were standing at a corral fence with nothing. Now we own the finest bathhouse in Montana territory. Jackson raised his coffee cup. To tomorrow, to Four Springs, and to the finest partners a man could ask for. They touched cups, making their ritual toast, but each of them felt the weight of what tomorrow would bring. Opening day would not just launch a business. It would declare war on men who controlled Copper Creek through fear and corruption. But they were ready. They had to be. There was no turning back now. Opening day dawned clear and cold, the first frost of autumn glittering on the grass. The Four Springs bathhouse and laundry opened its doors at 8 o'clock in the morning, and by 9 o'clock a line of miners stretched down the entrance path. Word had spread farther and faster than they had anticipated. Men had traveled from camps 20 miles away for the promise of hot baths and clean clothes. The first customer was a middle-aged miner named Patrick O'Brien, who removed his hat respectfully when Delia greeted him. "Morning, miss. I've been looking forward to this for weeks. Haven't had a proper bath in 6 months." Delia checked him in with a warm smile and showed him to bathing room 3. Within an hour, all 8 bathing rooms were occupied, with miners waiting their turn in the comfortable reception area Mary had created. The laundry facility was equally busy, with Ellen and Rose processing loads of filthy work clothes that had not seen proper washing in months. By afternoon, they were overwhelmed with business. Jackson stepped in to help manage the flow of customers, while Mary worked frantically to schedule appointments for the coming days. The advance bookings had been merely a fraction of the actual demand. Miners were willing to wait hours for their turn, and many were making appointments for the following week before they even left. The women worked smoothly as a team, each performing their role with practiced efficiency. Rose's therapeutic baths were especially popular. Miners who spent their days swinging pickaxes and pushing ore carts suffered chronic muscle pain, and her herbal treatments provided real relief. Word of her healing skills spread quickly. By the time they closed at 8 o'clock that evening, they had served 43 bath customers and processed 62 loads of laundry. Mary tallied the receipts with shaking hands. $31.75 in one day. Ellen sat down heavily, exhausted but elated. At this rate, we'll recoup our investment in 3 months. But Jackson was troubled. This is too successful, too fast. Pike and Garrett are going to notice. He was right. The next morning, just as they were preparing to open, Marshal Cooper rode up to the property looking grim. "Jackson, ladies, I need to speak with you. All of you." They gathered in the reception area, sensing bad news. Cooper removed his hat and turned it in his hands, a nervous gesture. "There's been a legal challenge filed against your business. Samuel Garrett, acting on behalf of the town council, has obtained a temporary injunction blocking your operation pending a full territorial court review." "On what grounds?" Ellen demanded. "Multiple allegations, improper water rights documentation, building code violations, operating a business without proper commercial licensing. The list goes on. Most of it's nonsense, but the judge granted the injunction anyway. You have to cease operations immediately until the court hearing." "When's the hearing?" Jackson asked, his voice dangerously calm. 3 weeks from now. Judge Harlan Thompson will preside. He's based out of Helena, supposedly impartial, but Cooper hesitated. "But what?" "But Marcus Webb has business interests in Helena, and judges are human. They can be influenced." Mary felt her world tilting. 3 weeks without income will destroy us. We have suppliers to pay, obligations to meet. We'll be ruined." "I know. I'm sorry. I tried to talk to the judge, But his mind was made up. The injunction stands. After Cooper left, they sat in stunned silence. Outside, miners were already arriving for their appointments, unaware that the bathhouse was now legally forbidden to operate. Jackson had to go out and turn them away, explaining the situation. Some miners were angry, others sympathetic, but all were disappointed. That evening, as they sat around the table trying to process what had happened, there was a knock at the door. Jackson opened it to find Thomas Reed, the lumberyard owner, looking nervous. "Mr. Cole, I heard about the injunction. I came because there's something you need to know, something I probably should have told you months ago." "Come in," Jackson said, noting Reed's agitation. Reed entered and accepted a chair. He looked at each of them before speaking. 3 years ago, before you filed your homestead claim on this land, Jackson, there was another claim filed. A man named Robert Garrison claimed these 40 acres, but he never developed the property. He let the claim lapse after 6 months. By all legal rights, the land was free for reclaiming, which is what you did. "I know all this," Jackson said. "I checked the territorial records carefully before filing. What you don't know is that Robert Garrison was Samuel Garrett's younger brother. He died 2 years ago of pneumonia. But before he died, he sold something to his brother, mineral rights to this property. Just the mineral rights, not the land itself. It was legal at the time, even though he didn't actually own the land anymore." The implications hit Jackson like a physical blow. Mineral rights to land he didn't own, that shouldn't be legally valid. It shouldn't be. But Garrett has a document, properly notarized and filed with the territorial office. In the confusion of frontier land claims, no one noticed the irregularity. Garrett's been sitting on these rights, waiting to see if anything valuable turned up on this land. "The hot springs," Rose said quietly. "They're technically a mineral resource." Reed nodded. "Exactly. Garrett's legal challenge isn't really about building codes or water rights. It's about establishing that he owns the mineral rights to the hot springs themselves. If he succeeds, you can keep the land and buildings, but you can't use the springs without his permission, and he'll charge you so much for that permission that you'll be working for him, not yourselves." Mary felt sick. "So everything we've built, all our work, would belong to him, effectively. He'd control your water source, which means he'd control your business." Jackson stood abruptly, pacing the small room like a caged animal. "This is why he wanted to buy us out. He knew about this all along. The vandalism, the harassment, all of it was designed to soften us up, make us eager to sell before we discovered the truth." "Can we fight it?" Ellen asked. "There must be some legal challenge we can make." Reed looked doubtful. "You'd need a very good lawyer, which costs money you probably don't have. And even then, frontier land law is complicated. Judges often side with established businessmen over newcomers. Garrett has connections throughout the territory." After Reed left, the 5 partners sat in heavy silence. The dream they had worked so hard to build was crumbling, not from their own failures, but from legal machinations they had never seen coming. Delia spoke first, her voice small. "So we lose everything." "Not everything," Jackson said, though his voice lacked conviction. "We still own the land and buildings. We could sell them, recoup some of our investment." "To whom?" Ellen asked bitterly. "The buildings are designed specifically for the hot springs. Without access to the water, they're worthless. Garrett knows that. He'll wait until we're desperate, then buy everything for pennies on the dollar." Mary opened her ledger, looking at the careful records she had kept. 6 months of expenses, loans taken, materials purchased, labor invested. They had poured everything into this venture. Without the business income, they could not repay their debts. They would lose the property to foreclosure within months. "There has to be something we can do," Rose said. "Some legal angle we haven't considered." Jackson sat down heavily. "I'll go to Helena, try to find a lawyer willing to take our case. But Reed's right, we don't have money for proper legal representation. And Garrett's had 3 years to prepare his case. He's been planning this from the moment I filed my claim. Why didn't he just challenge your claim immediately?" Delia asked. Because he didn't know if the springs had commercial value. He was waiting to see if I found something worth fighting over. When he saw us building the bathhouse, he knew, and he waited until we were fully invested, until we had spent everything, before making his move. That way, when he wins, he gets a fully operational business for a fraction of what it's worth. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. They had been set up from the beginning, allowed to build their dream only so it could be taken away more profitably. That night, Mary stood outside, looking at the beautiful bathhouse that would never serve another customer. Inside her pocket, she touched the receipt Jackson had given her for her cameo locket, proof of her investment in a business that now seemed doomed to fail. She thought of Catherine, of the life she had left behind in Boston, of the desperate hope that had brought her west. She had gambled everything on this chance, and she was about to lose. They all were. But as she stood there in the cold autumn night, watching steam rise from the hot springs that had given them all such hope, Mary felt something shift inside her. Anger, yes. Despair, certainly. But also something harder and more determined. Samuel Garrett had underestimated them. He saw 4 desperate women and 1 stubborn cowboy. He saw easy victims. He had no idea what they were truly capable of when pushed to the edge. Mary walked back inside, where the others still sat in stunned silence. "We're not done yet," she said firmly. "Garrett thinks he's won because he's been planning this for years. But he made one mistake. He didn't count on us being willing to fight back with everything we have." "What can we do?" Ellen asked. "We have no money, no legal resources, and 3 weeks until a court hearing we'll probably lose." "I don't know yet," Mary admitted, "but we're going to figure something out. We didn't come this far just to surrender." Jackson looked at her with renewed respect. "You have a plan?" "Not yet, but I will. We all will. Together." Mary looked at each of them in turn. "Garrett wanted us to feel helpless. Let's prove him wrong." In the candlelight, the 5 partners faced each other, battered but not broken. They had 3 weeks to find a way to save everything they had built. 3 weeks to take on a man who controlled most of Copper Creek through money and corruption. It seemed impossible. But then again, 6 months ago, building a bathhouse with 4 rejected mail-order brides had seemed impossible too, and they had done that. The next morning, Mary woke before dawn with an idea. She had spent half the night thinking, her teacher's mind working through the problem methodically. By the time the others gathered for breakfast, she had filled several pages with notes. "We need to attack this from multiple angles," she announced. "Legal, public opinion, and evidence. Jackson, you go to Helena and find the best lawyer willing to work for deferred payment. Ellen and I will research territorial land law. There must be precedents for situations like this. Rose, I need you to document every aspect of the hot springs. Scientific measurements, mineral analysis, everything. Delia, you're going to help me with something that might seem strange, but trust me." "What?" Delia asked. "We're going to interview every single miner who used our bathhouse on opening day. We're going to collect testimonials about the value of our service and the positive impact on the community. We're going to show that shutting us down harms the public interest." Jackson looked skeptical. "You think testimonials will matter in a court case about mineral rights? Maybe not directly, but judges are human. They respond to public pressure and community sentiment. If we can show that Garrett's actions harm the community he's supposed to serve as a banker and council member, it undermines his credibility." It was a long shot, but it was something. They divided the tasks and set to work immediately. Jackson rode to Helena the next day, a hard 3-day journey each way. He carried letters of introduction from Marshall Cooper and Thomas Reed, both vouching for his character and the legitimacy of his business. Helena was the territorial capital, home to lawyers who handled complex land disputes. Jackson needed to find one willing to take a case against a well-connected businessman for payment that might never come. Meanwhile, Mary and Delia began their rounds of the mining camps. They visited Patrick O'Brien first, the man who had been their first customer. He welcomed them into his rough cabin, offering coffee and his full support. "That bathhouse was the finest thing to happen to Copper Creek in 5 years," he said emphatically. "I told everyone about it. Some of the men were talking about bringing their wives and families to settle here because of facilities like yours. Garrett closing you down is pure spite, nothing else." "Would you be willing to testify to that in court?" Mary asked. "Absolutely, and I know 30 other men who will too." They collected 17 testimonials that first day. Miners spoke of improved health, the simple dignity of being clean, the hope that civilization was finally coming to the rough territory. Several mentioned they had been considering permanent settlement in Copper Creek, specifically because of the bathhouse. One elderly miner with arthritis described how Rose's therapeutic treatments had given him the first pain-free night he had experienced in years. Mary documented everything meticulously, having each man sign his statement and date it. The stack of testimonials grew daily. Ellen and Rose, meanwhile, made their own trip to Helena, taking a different approach. Ellen had realized that territorial land records were public documents. If Garrett's claim to the mineral rights was questionable, there might be evidence in the filing records themselves. Rose's scientific expertise would help analyze the springs classification under territorial law. In Helena's land office, they spent days poring through dusty filing cabinets and ledger books. Ellen's sharp eyes caught what others had missed. Robert Garrison's original land claim had indeed lapsed 6 months after filing, as required by law if the claimant did not improve the land. But the mineral rights document was filed 8 months after the land claim lapsed, during a period when Garrison legally owned nothing. "This is irregular," Ellen said excitedly. "The mineral rights were filed after he lost ownership of the land. How can you sell rights to something you don't own?" The clerk they were working with, a young man named David Chen, looked at the documents carefully. "You're right, this should have been rejected, but look at the signature on the approval form." Ellen looked. The approving official had been Theodore Pike, currently mayor of Copper Creek, but previously a territorial land office clerk in Helena. "Pike approved his associate's illegal filing," Rose said quietly. "This entire scheme was planned from the beginning. They made copies of every relevant document, paying for official certified copies that could be presented as evidence. They also discovered something else. The hot springs on Jackson's property were classified in the territorial survey as thermal features, which, under Montana law, were different from extractable minerals like gold or copper. Thermal features were considered part of the land itself, not separate mineral rights. It was a technical distinction, but it might be enough. Back at the property, Delia helped Mary organize their evidence into a comprehensive presentation. Delia's neat handwriting transcribed testimonials into a clean ledger. She created a map showing how many mining camps relied on Copper Creek for services and how the bathhouse served a community need that no other business addressed. Her organizational skills, honed by years of factory work, proved invaluable. Rose conducted scientific surveys of the springs, measuring temperature, mineral content, flow rates, and thermal output. She prepared detailed charts and diagrams that demonstrated the springs were naturally occurring geological features, not extractable mineral deposits. She even found an academic paper from a university geologist classifying thermal springs separately from traditional mining claims. Jackson returned from Helena after 6 days with cautiously optimistic news. He had found a lawyer named Margaret Blackwood, one of the few female attorneys practicing in the territory. She was young, hungry for cases that could make her reputation, and deeply skeptical of corrupt land dealings. "She'll take our case," Jackson reported. "She wants a retainer of $100, with the balance due only if we win. If we lose, we owe her nothing more." "Can we afford $100?" Delia asked. Mary checked her ledger. They had the opening day receipts, some remaining savings, and a few advance bookings they would have to refund. "Barely. We'll have to let go of our safety margin, but yes." "Then we hire her," Ellen said firmly. Margaret Blackwood arrived at the property 2 days later, a stern woman in her 30s with intelligent eyes and no patience for nonsense. She reviewed all their evidence with professional thoroughness, asking pointed questions and taking extensive notes. "This is good work," she said after hours of review. "Better than I expected from non-lawyers. The testimonials establish community impact. The filing irregularities undermine Garrett's claim. The scientific classification of thermal springs versus mineral deposits gives us legal grounds to challenge the entire premise of his case. We have a fighting chance." "Just a chance?" Rose asked. "Honestly? Yes. Judge Thompson is conservative and generally favors established property rights over technical challenges. We're asking him to invalidate a 3-year-old filing that's been on record, properly notarized, and never challenged until now. That's a high bar to clear. But the evidence of impropriety in the original approval process is compelling. If I can get Pike's involvement exposed, it could swing Thompson's judgment." Over the next week, they prepared for the hearing with intensity that bordered on obsession. Margaret coached them on courtroom procedures and testimony. Mary practiced presenting their financial records and community impact evidence. Rose prepared to explain the scientific classification of thermal springs. Ellen would testify about the filing irregularities. Jackson would present the original homestead claim and his good faith development of the property. Margaret warned them that Garrett would have his own lawyers, probably multiple attorneys from a well-funded firm. He would argue that mineral rights were distinct from land ownership, that his claim was properly filed and recorded, and that any irregularities in approval were minor clerical matters that did not invalidate the underlying claim. He'll also argue that allowing your challenge would undermine all recorded property rights in the territory, Margaret explained. That's a powerful argument. Judges don't like creating precedents that destabilize existing property records. "So we're probably going to lose," Delia said quietly. "We're the underdog, certainly, but underdogs do win sometimes, especially when they have truth on their side and the other side has been dishonest. I've won cases with worse odds." 3 days before the hearing, Samuel Garrett himself rode out to the property. Jackson met him at the property line, refusing to let him enter. "Cole, I'm here to make one final offer," Garrett said, his voice smooth as oil. $4,000 for everything, land, buildings, equipment. You can walk away clean, pay off your debts, and still have something left over. Consider it seriously. You're not going to win in court." "Not interested." "You're a fool. Thompson will rule in my favor. The law is on my side. When you lose, you'll get nothing. Foreclosure will take everything, and I'll buy it all at sheriff's auction for a fraction of what I'm offering now. If you're so confident you'll win, why are you here making offers?" Garrett's pleasant facade cracked slightly. "I'm trying to be reasonable. You and those women have worked hard. I respect that. But this is business. This is my property by right, and I'm willing to pay you for the improvements you've made. That's more than fair. What's fair is what we built, what we invested, and what we deserve to keep. See you in court, Garrett." Garrett's eyes turned cold. "You'll regret this, Cole. All of you will." After he left, Mary came outside, having watched the confrontation from the window. "He's worried. A confident man doesn't make offers 3 days before a hearing he expects to win." "Maybe. Or maybe he's just greedy and wants to save the cost of lawyers." "No," Rose said, joining them. "Mary's right. He's worried about something. We must have evidence that threatens him more than we realize." Ellen emerged with a thoughtful expression. "The Pike connection. That's what scares him. If we expose that Pike approved his associate's fraudulent filing while working for the land office, it's not just about our case anymore. It could trigger investigations into other dealings, other approvals Pike handled during his time there. Garrett's worried about opening that door." Margaret Blackwood, who had been staying with them for the final preparations, nodded agreement. "That's our angle. We're not just challenging a mineral rights claim. We're exposing a pattern of corruption that goes back years. Thompson will have to consider the broader implications. The night before they were to leave for Helena and the hearing, the five partners sat together one last time on their property. The bathhouse stood silent and beautiful in the moonlight, a testament to everything they had built and everything they stood to lose. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Jackson said quietly, "I want you all to know something. This has been the most meaningful thing I've done in my life. Building this place, working with all of you, it gave me purpose. I'd lost when Sarah died. Even if we lose, I don't regret a moment of it." Mary reached out and took his hand, then Ellen's. Rose took Delia's hand, and they formed a circle, connected and united. "We don't lose until the judge's gavel falls," Mary said firmly. "And even then, they can take our business, but they can't take away what we've proven. We've shown that women can build, can create, can succeed in a world that told us we were worthless. That truth remains, no matter what Thompson decides." "To Four Springs," Ellen said. "To Four Springs," they echoed. And in the morning, they rode to Helena to fight for everything they had built. The Helena courthouse was an imposing stone building that seemed designed to intimidate. Judge Harlan Thompson's courtroom occupied the main floor, with high ceilings, dark wood paneling, and an elevated bench that made the judge look like a figure of absolute authority. Samuel Garrett sat at the plaintiff's table with three expensive lawyers in tailored suits. They radiated confidence and professional competence. Behind them sat Mayor Pike and Marcus Webb, there to show support and intimidate the opposition. At the defendant's table, Margaret Blackwood sat with Jackson, Mary, Ellen, Rose, and Delia. They wore their best clothes, which were still worn and obviously inexpensive compared to Garrett's legal team. But they sat with dignity, backs straight, eyes forward. Judge Thompson entered, and everyone stood. He was in his 60s, with white hair and a stern face that revealed nothing. "Be seated. We'll proceed with the case of Garrett versus Cole regarding disputed mineral rights to property in Copper Creek. Plaintiff's counsel, you may begin." Garrett's lead attorney, a silver-haired man named Charles Worthington, stood smoothly. His presentation was polished and professional. He outlined Garrett's claim methodically: the original filing by Robert Garrison, the legal transfer of mineral rights before Garrison's death, the proper recording of those rights with the territorial office. He presented the notarized documents, the filing stamps, the official approvals. "Your Honor, this case is quite simple," Worthington concluded. "Mr. Garrett holds legitimate, properly recorded mineral rights to the hot springs on the disputed property. The defendants are attempting to use those springs commercially without permission from the rights holder. This is clearly illegal, and we request the court affirm Mr. Garrett's ownership of said rights and grant appropriate compensation for unauthorized use." Thompson looked at the documents carefully. "These filings appear to be in order. Miss Blackwood, what is the basis for your challenge?" Margaret stood, and her voice was clear and firm. "Your Honor, we challenge on 3 grounds. First, the hot springs in question are not extractable minerals under territorial law, but rather thermal features integral to the land itself. Second, the mineral rights were filed after Robert Garrison's land claim had legally lapsed, meaning he owned nothing at the time of filing. Third, the approval of this irregular filing was conducted by Theodore Pike, who had personal and business associations with Samuel Garrett, representing a clear conflict of interest. A murmur went through the courtroom. Pike, sitting in the gallery, visibly stiffened. Worthington objected immediately. "Your Honor, Miss Blackwood is making inflammatory accusations without evidence. She's trying to distract from the simple legal facts of this case." "I have evidence, Your Honor," Margaret replied calmly. "Certified copies of territorial land records showing the timeline of filings, scientific analysis of the thermal springs classification, and sworn testimony from multiple witnesses regarding the community impact of shutting down the defendant's legitimate business." Thompson looked interested despite himself. "Proceed with your evidence, Miss Blackwood, but stick to facts relevant to the legal question at hand." Margaret called Mary to the stand first. Mary presented the financial records, showing the investment made, the business model developed, and the community response. She described the opening day, the overwhelming demand, and the positive impact on public health and community morale. Worthington cross-examined, trying to establish that financial investment did not equal legal right to disputed mineral resources. But Mary held firm, her teacher's clarity serving her well. She made the human case these springs had been abandoned and useless until they developed them into a business that served the community. Ellen testified next, walking through the filing records with precision. She showed that Robert Garrison's claim had lapsed 6 months after filing, as required by law for undeveloped claims. The mineral rights document was filed 8 months after the lapse, during which time Garrison owned nothing. "Miss Pritchard, are you a lawyer?" Worthington asked condescendingly during cross-examination. "No, sir. I'm a seamstress. But I can read dates and count months. The filing is irregular." "Irregular, perhaps, but not invalid. The territorial office accepted and recorded the filing. That makes it official, regardless of any minor timing issues." "Is it minor when someone files rights to property they don't own?" "Objection," Worthington said. "The witness is not qualified to make legal judgments." "Sustained," Thompson said, but he was taking notes. Rose provided the scientific testimony, explaining thermal springs classification under Montana territorial law. She presented her documentation with academic precision, showing that thermal features were consistently treated differently from extractable minerals in legal precedent. Worthington tried to shake her testimony, but Rose's calm expertise was unassailable. She had done her research thoroughly, citing specific cases and regulations. During a brief recess, Margaret pulled the group aside. "We're doing better than I expected. Thompson is actually listening. But the real battle comes next. I'm going to call Pike to the stand. Garrett's team will fight it, but if Thompson allows it, we might have a chance." "And if he doesn't allow it?" Delia asked. "Then we probably lose. Everything hinges on exposing the corruption in the original approval." They returned to the courtroom for the afternoon session, knowing that the next few hours would determine their fate. Margaret stood and addressed the court. "Your Honor, I call Theodore Pike to the stand." Worthington was on his feet immediately. "Objection. Mr. Pike is not a party to this case. This is harassment and a fishing expedition." "Your Honor," Margaret countered. "Mr. Pike approved the mineral rights filing in question while serving as a territorial land office clerk. His testimony is directly relevant to establishing whether the filing was proper." Thompson considered for a long moment. "I'll allow it. Mr. Pike, please take the stand." Pike stood reluctantly, his face flushed with anger. He took the oath and sat stiffly in the witness chair. Margaret approached with certified documents in hand. "Mr. Pike, is this your signature on the approval form for the mineral rights filing dated September 12, 1880? Pike looked at the document. "It appears to be, yes." "At that time, you were employed as a clerk in the Territorial Land Office, correct?" "Yes." "And did you have a personal or business relationship with Samuel Garrett at that time?" "We were acquaintances. Copper Creek is a small community." Margaret produced another document. "According to Helena business records, you and Samuel Garrett were partners in a mining supply company from 1878 to 1881. Would you call that merely an acquaintance?" Pike shifted uncomfortably. "We had business dealings. That doesn't mean anything improper occurred. Did you review the land records before approving the mineral rights filing?" "I assume so. That was standard procedure." "You assume? You don't remember specifically?" "It was years ago. I processed hundreds of filings." Margaret showed him another document, the timeline Ellen had discovered. The land claim by Robert Garrison lapsed 6 months after filing in March of 1880. The mineral rights filing was submitted in September of that same year, 6 months after Garrison no longer owned the land. "Did you notice this timing issue when you approved the filing?" Pike's face reddened further. "If the filing was properly notarized and signed, I approved it. That was my job." Your job was to verify that filings were legally valid, wasn't it? Objection, Worthington said. Miss Blackwood is badgering the witness. I'm establishing whether proper procedures were followed, Your Honor, Margaret replied. Overruled. Answer the question, Mr. Pike. Pike's voice was tight with suppressed anger. I processed filings according to office procedures. If there were irregularities, they were minor clerical matters. Minor clerical matters like approving mineral rights to land the filer didn't own for your business partner? Margaret's voice was sharp now. Mr. Pike, did Samuel Garrett offer you any compensation or benefit for approving this filing? Absolutely not. That's slander. Then why did you approve a clearly irregular filing for a close business associate? And why, years later, are you here in this courtroom supporting his case against the people you've been harassing back in Copper Creek? Worthington objected again, but Thompson was leaning forward now, clearly interested. Pike's composure cracked. I approved a legal document. What Garrett did with those rights is his business. And the people of Copper Creek have a right to be concerned about unlicensed businesses operating in their vicinity. Unlicensed. The defendants have all proper business licenses filed with Marshal Cooper's office. Another false claim. Mr. Pike, how many other false claims have you made over the years? Your Honor, I object strenuously to this line of questioning. Worthington was nearly shouting now. Thompson held up his hand for silence. Miss Blackwood, you've made your point. Do you have further questions for this witness? Just one, Your Honor. Mr. Pike, did you ever once in your capacity as territorial land clerk approve a mineral rights filing for property that the filer demonstrably did not own at the time of filing, except for this one filing for Samuel Garrett? Pike was silent for a long moment. I don't recall. You don't recall? Thank you, Mr. Pike. No further questions. Pike stepped down, his face dark with fury. As he passed the defense table, his glare at the four women was filled with such hatred that Delia instinctively shrank back. Margaret then called Jackson to the stand. His testimony was straightforward and honest. He described researching the land claim carefully, finding it abandoned, filing proper homestead papers, developing the property in good faith, and creating a legitimate business that served the community. He described the harassment, vandalism, and threats they had faced. Under cross-examination, Worthington tried to establish that Jackson should have discovered the mineral rights filing before building his business. But Jackson's response was simple and effective. I checked for valid, current claims. There were none. How could I find a filing that shouldn't have been approved in the first place? The courtroom session ended near sunset. Thompson announced he would review all evidence and testimony overnight and deliver his verdict in the morning. The five partners, along with Margaret, left the courthouse exhausted. They found a modest boarding house that agreed to house them all cheaply. That night, none of them could eat much. They sat together in the small common room, too nervous to speak. I did the best I could, Margaret said quietly. Pike's testimony hurt his credibility significantly, but Thompson's a conservative judge. He might rule that even an improperly approved filing, once recorded, must stand to preserve the integrity of the property record system. So we wait, Mary said. We wait, Margaret agreed. They slept little that night. Each of them lay awake, thinking about the bathhouse, the investment, the dreams that hung in the balance. In separate rooms but united in worry, they waited for dawn and the verdict that would determine their future. When morning came, they dressed in somber silence and walked back to the courthouse for the final judgment. Judge Thompson entered the courtroom at precisely 9 o'clock, carrying a thick folder of notes. His face revealed nothing as everyone stood, then sat at his gesture. The room was packed with spectators. Word had spread about the case, and people wanted to witness the outcome. Thompson settled into his chair and put on his reading glasses. I've reviewed all evidence and testimony presented in the case of Garrett versus Cole. This is not a simple matter of competing property claims. This case involves questions of procedural integrity, the classification of natural resources under territorial law, and the balance between established property rights and good faith development. He paused, and in that silence, Mary felt her heart hammering. Beside her, Ellen gripped her hand tightly. "Regarding the classification of thermal springs," Thompson continued, "I find Miss Chen's testimony and documentation compelling. Territorial precedent consistently treats thermal features as integral to the land itself, not as extractable mineral deposits subject to separate claims. The hot springs on the disputed property are naturally occurring geological features, not minerals in the legal sense that allows for separate rights claims." Margaret exhaled slowly. It was not a verdict yet, but it was favorable. "However," Thompson said, and Mary's hope wavered, "the central question is whether a properly filed and recorded document, even if irregularly approved, can be invalidated years after the fact. This is where I must consider the broader implications for property law in the territory." Garrett leaned forward, confidence returning to his face. "The evidence presented by the defense shows clear irregularities in the approval process. The timeline demonstrates that Robert Garrison did not own the land in question at the time he filed for mineral rights. Theodore Pike's testimony failed to provide satisfactory explanation for approving such a filing, and his personal relationship with Samuel Garrett raises serious questions about conflict of interest." Pike, sitting in the gallery, looked like he wanted to storm out, but was frozen in place by pride and fear. "More troubling," Thompson continued, his voice hardening, "is the pattern of behavior following this irregular filing. The harassment, vandalism, and intimidation described by the defendants and corroborated by Marshal Cooper's reports suggest an attempt to force capitulation rather than pursue legitimate legal remedies. This court does not look favorably upon such tactics." Worthington started to rise, perhaps to object, then thought better of it and remained seated. "After careful consideration, I find that the mineral rights filing in question was improperly approved for property the filer did not own. While I am hesitant to invalidate recorded documents, the irregularity here is not a minor clerical error, but a fundamental flaw that strikes at the heart of property law. You cannot sell or claim rights to something you do not own." Mary felt tears spring to her eyes. Ellen squeezed her hand so hard it hurt. "Furthermore, the thermal springs in question are not minerals, subject to separate claims under territorial law. Therefore, I rule in favor of the defendants. Samuel Garrett's claim to mineral rights on the disputed property is invalid. Jackson Cole and his business partners hold clear and unencumbered title to their land and all natural resources thereon." The courtroom erupted. Garrett was on his feet, his face purple with rage. "This is outrageous, I demand." Thompson's gavel came down hard. "Mr. Garrett, sit down." "I'm not finished." The room fell silent again. "Additionally, I am referring this matter to the Territorial Attorney General for investigation into improper conduct by Theodore Pike during his tenure at the Land Office. The evidence suggests a pattern of approving questionable filings for associates that warrants further scrutiny." Pike actually did storm out then, his boots loud on the wooden floor. Thompson let him go. "The injunction against the Four Springs bathhouse and laundry is hereby dissolved. The defendants are free to resume operations immediately. This court also awards court costs to the defendants, to be paid by the plaintiff. We are adjourned." The gavel fell, and suddenly Margaret was hugging Mary, and Rose was crying, and Delia was laughing through tears. Jackson stood still for a moment, as if he could not quite believe it, then pulled Ellen into a careful embrace. They had won. Against all odds, they had actually won. Garrett pushed past them without a word, his lawyers gathering documents and following him hastily. Worthington paused only to nod respectfully to Margaret. "Well argued, Counselor. You outmaneuvered us." Outside the courthouse, they stood in the autumn sunlight, letting the reality sink in. They had come to Helena expecting to lose everything. Instead, they were returning home victorious, free to operate their business without threat. The journey back to Copper Creek took 3 days, but they scarcely felt the travel time. They talked and planned and dreamed again about the future. They would reopen the bathhouse immediately. They would expand the laundry service. Rose wanted to develop more therapeutic treatments. Ellen talked about adding tailoring services. Mary planned a proper bookkeeping office. Delia suggested opening a small cafe where customers could enjoy refreshments while waiting for their baths. Jackson listened to their enthusiasm with quiet satisfaction, occasionally adding practical suggestions, but mostly just enjoying their joy. When they finally crested the hill overlooking their property, they stopped the wagon to take in the view. The Four Springs bathhouse stood beautiful and solid in the afternoon light, steam rising from the natural hot springs like promises kept. "We did it," Mary said softly, touching the place where her cameo locket used to rest. "We actually built something lasting." "We're not done building yet," Ellen said with a smile. "This is just the beginning." They were right. In the months and years that followed, the Four Springs bathhouse and laundry became the most successful business in Copper Creek. The four women became wealthy in their own right, respected businesswomen who proved that rejected mail-order brides could be so much more than the men who rejected them ever imagined. Samuel Garrett's influence in Copper Creek declined steadily. The Attorney General's investigation uncovered multiple irregular filings Pike had approved, leading to Pike's resignation as mayor and several civil suits. Marcus Webb found his workers increasingly willing to stand up for their rights, empowered by the example of four women who had fought corruption and won. Jackson Cole remained their partner and friend, proud of what they had built together, but always insisting it was their victory, not his. He had given them the opportunity, yes, but they had seized it with both hands and turned it into something remarkable. On the anniversary of their opening day, they gathered at the corral fence post where they had stood a year ago, humiliated and rejected. Now they owned the land surrounding it, and the bathhouse behind them served hundreds of customers weekly. "To second chances," Mary proposed, raising her cup. "To partnership," Ellen added. "To proving them wrong," Rose said with quiet satisfaction. "To home," Delia finished simply. They touched cups together, five people who had found each other in the worst moment of their lives and built something beautiful from that shared desperation. The cowboy who saved four maidens everyone ignored had indeed changed their lives forever, but in the end they had saved themselves. And that made all the difference.